Jimburdan himi jang and munum chimborga gata, Dagradang Zanto Shimerdo, Tumba Duji Chanlaki Shom.
To benefit beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Next, we will continue discussing the classic of filial piety. In fact, the classic of filial piety is also an ancient text from more than 2,500 years ago. As we carefully study it, even though it is separated from our current era by many thousands of years, and some of its content still remains incredibly vibrant and highly relevant today. When we thoughtfully apply it in the 21st century in many significant ways, it may actually be quite precious. Not only is it not outdated, just like back in around 1966, at that particular time, there was a special emphasis on outdated thinking, outdated culture, outdated customs, and outdated traditions. These four types of old were considered targets to be opposed. But now, even though we are in a new era, everyone really emphasizes a lot of new ideas, new concepts, and new creativity in this new era. Sometimes, even though we call something new, in reality, we may still genuinely need some of the established older ways of thinking. Perhaps for our hearts and minds, for our morality, and for our personal cultivation as a whole, these can be very helpful. Here, although there is no discussion of the practice of emptiness, nor is there any explanation of how to cultivate bodhicitta, nor of renunciation, in many ways it still seems to share similarities with bodhicitta. Because bodhicitta truly speaks of the profound act of liberating all sentient beings, helping them attain Buddhahood through such actions. Moreover, bodhicitta is also present in our daily lives. In very simple, detailed aspects of daily life, whether it's helping others or setting standards for ourselves, including the chapters on mindfulness and vigilance and on heedfulness in the Bodhikaryavattara. Some of the content within these, I feel, is very similar to passages in the classic of filial piety, because in the Bodhikaryavattara, it teaches to be mindful of our words, actions, including finding comfort and ease in the nature of mind. It specifically discusses these principles. In today's study of the classic of filial piety, it talks about being a good person. So, the Mahayana Bodhikaryavattara, the most supreme teachings. The classic of filial piety is also one of them. It's just that the names are different now. But in reality, much of what is discussed here is very similar to our own spiritual practice. So, some Buddhists might wonder, what does this have to do with us? But when we study, there may be all sorts of knowledge that we need to acquire, just like what I quoted yesterday. A truly wise person, in order to understand what is unreasonable and what is reasonable, will diligently study various treatises and also rely upon teachers who possess great qualities. Today, we are discussing chapter 10, commemorating filial conduct. It records many principles of filial piety. Specifically, it mainly talks about the filial piety towards one's parents. Here, the content is a bit different from the previous discussions on filial piety. The content about being filial to one's parents is relatively similar. So next, let's look at this chapter that we will discuss today. Or, if we have sufficient time, we might then move on to the next chapter. Confucius said, when a filial child truly serves their parents, in daily life, they show utmost respect. In providing for them, they bring them joy. When they are ill, they show deep concern. Mourning, they express profound grief. And during ancestral rites, they maintain utmost solemnity. When all five of these essential aspects are fulfilled, only then can one truly serve one's parents. Here it means that Confucius himself said this, as a truly filial child, when serving their parents in life, follows the 5 principles mentioned below. As for these 5 important principles, I think some of us, perhaps, when we were really relying entirely on our parents, or in front of our parents, maybe we never managed to do these things. So, what are these principles? The first is to show respect at home. That is to say, when your parents are alive, in daily family life, you should always be respectful and reverent in front of your parents. It doesn't always mean that you talk back to them whenever they say something. You should indeed be very respectful and polite at all times in front of your parents. Your actions should show respect to your parents, and your words should be respectful as well. And in your heart, you should also hold your parents in deep respect. The standards for being a good student and child also teaches us that when your parents call, respond without delay. When they give instructions, carry them out diligently. Don't waste time, answer immediately. If parents give instructions, carry them out diligently. It also covers principles for serving parents, like keeping them warm in winter and cool in summer and so on. Therefore, while your beloved parents are still very much alive, in our daily lives, we should always be respectful toward them. Those who study the classic of filial piety, especially some lay people, are also required to take these classes in our schools nowadays. After studying the standards for being a good student and child, including in some of our related schools, and in some classes on traditional culture, actually, after learning the standards for being a good student and child, children understand. They develop gratitude toward their parents. It's not just reciting lines. Then, whatever you arrange for him, he immediately grabs something and starts hitting. Even from a very young age, he consistently gets used to hitting his parents. In fact, such aggressive behavior could potentially lead to killing one's parents when fully grown up. Because if a sense of respect isn't cultivated from childhood, it will be very difficult to develop it later in life. So, although we know that Western culture is different when it truly comes to our own personal behavior, and when we look at the interests of the world as a whole, indeed there are aspects of Eastern culture that should not be Westernized. We've met some Western parents who are actually very heartbroken and deeply saddened too, because they worked so hard to raise their children, to bring them up, constantly making so many sacrifices. But when their children grow up, they show no sense of gratitude at all. If there's not even a bit of respect, the parents really feel disheartened. So we shouldn't always think that just because something comes from the West, it must be extremely valuable. That's actually not the case. Sometimes when it comes to culture, whether it's from the East, West, North, or South, whichever particular culture is more powerful and dominant, it will inevitably and naturally assimilate the weaker culture. This is simply a fundamental law of nature. It's not because it's better, not because Western culture is particularly superior, that so many of our Eastern traditional cultures have been Westernized. That's not the case. One reason is that, as we mentioned earlier, during the 1960s and 70s, our own traditional culture suffered a huge blow. Another reason is that nowadays, globally, Hollywood-led Western culture is extremely dominant. Because of this dominance, many of our cherished traditions, whether valuable or perhaps not, have gradually been wiped out or even disappeared altogether. So, despite these challenges, we still firmly believe that no matter what your status is as children, you should always show respect to your parents. Even if the child is a university student or studying in a very prestigious Western country, or is a PhD student or postdoctoral researcher at a top university, while your parents may be completely illiterate and unable to read a single word, it is still very good from the perspective of filial piety to show them respect. This is also true in some of the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. Some Khenpos and Khenmos, in terms of culture and knowledge, far surpass their former refuge teachers and those initial mentors who enlightened them. But since they are still their own teachers, when they return, they show the utmost respect, often prostrating themselves in full devotion. I think this is very necessary. The very first thing to do is to show respect at home. In daily life, one should show respect to one's parents. Then, when it comes to supporting them, we should bring them joy. When we care for our parents, no matter if it's good food or nice clothes, we must make sure they live comfortably. We should make sure they are happy. That's the key, I think. We should care for our parents with a truly joyful and happy heart. Supporting our parents isn't just about giving them some money. It's not like being very dissatisfied and saying, "Fine, I'll give you some money." That kind of attitude is like how one would treat a beggar. It's very harsh and unreasonable to act like that. When we support our parents, we should remember that they have shown us great kindness. It's like how some wise disciples show deep respect to their teachers. No matter what, they do things with a joyful heart. For example, whether they're doing things for their teacher or making offerings, they don't do it reluctantly or with suffering. It should always be done with joy and happiness. So when we truly care for our parents, it should be the very same. It certainly shouldn't be with a dissatisfied or unhappy attitude. Nowadays, some people, even though they see it as their responsibility, sometimes visit their parents and occasionally give them some financial support, or buy them some food or essential things for their daily living, but their overall attitude is very poor, and that's simply not acceptable. As for parents, as we have mentioned before, a parent's heart is as soft as water, while a child's heart is as hard as stone. So their hearts are very tender, and they are always watching your expression. Especially as people get older, they become very sensitive. They feel that if their children are unhappy with them today, they start to worry about many things in all sorts of ways. Therefore, we should always treat them with great joy and utmost kindness. Now, the third point is causing them worry when they are ill. Once your parents fall ill, at this time, you absolutely shouldn't letting a nanny or someone else take them to the hospital, not even going to see them yourself, feeling nothing at all about it, and living your own life happily. This is the behavior of an unfilial person. When your parents fall ill, you should feel a sense of sadness, be very worried, and immediately go to take care of them. You must do everything you can to help your parents recover from the illness. In fact, in ancient times, people really took great care of their parents when they were ill. Nowadays, as everyone knows, many people are especially busy. Because of this, when their parents fall ill, they don't even go to see them. Some parents have even been dead for many years, and later, even the bodies have already decayed. There were such cases. Even now, in some advanced countries, parents are left in the countryside while all the children move to the cities. Later, people came to call this a living charnel ground. This was because it was just like a charnel ground in essence. All those elderly people are left together. It's especially pitiful. No one visits them, and when they fall ill, no one takes care of them. We should have a sense of sorrow and take care of them. And when they pass away, we should express our grief. Once they leave this world, when they have died, we should certainly feel a profound sense of mourning. We should grieve, feel sorrow, and be truly, deeply, deeply saddened. It's not that after our parents pass away, their respective children swiftly and immediately divide up the entire inheritance. Other than that, they don't feel the slightest bit of sadness. It really shouldn't be like this. Once our parents are gone, it truly seems that there are some significant traditional differences between the East and the West. For example, in China, people traditionally used to wear white clothes for mourning. In the Western world, people typically wear black clothes. There are also many different customs and traditions. All red decorations have to be taken down, including some notices. Colors used for occasions like New Year or weddings all have to be changed. But nowadays, it seems like people don't really care about these things anymore, even when it comes to themselves. After losing their parents, some people don't seem to feel much sadness either. But maybe that's just in certain places in the Han regions. For example, in some places in Shandong that still have traditional culture, some customs are still preserved. No, in our Tibetan region, it's pretty much the same. When parents are alive, most children are very respectful toward them. And when it comes time to care for their parents, several children will all compete to do so. If the parents aren't staying at their house, the children will be unhappy. For example, if there are 3 or 4 children, the parents will only stay at each place for a few days at a time. If the parents don't go to stay with them, the children will have opinions and be especially upset. They'll ask, "Why are you staying at their place and not at ours?" Some of you might also know a bit about the situation in Tibetan areas. I'm not just bragging here, Sometimes you can truly experience life in the beautiful Tibetan areas yourself. They really do take exceptionally good care of the elderly people there. And everyone genuinely feels that taking care of the elderly is either a kind of merit or a source of pride for themselves. For example, if there are several children and the elderly often stay at one child's home, that child feels very, very blessed indeed. So it truly seems that this particular kind of tradition is probably much better preserved in the Tibetan areas. And when parents pass away, everyone is truly deeply heartbroken. A few years ago, when my mother passed away, all 3 of my younger sisters were like that. They really couldn't bear it, and in the end, while crying, they vowed to be vegetarian for life. They used to love eating meat, but they pledged to be vegetarian for life and then went to Lhasa to worship the Buddha. Right at the moment she passed away, they made this vow in deep sorrow. In Tibetan areas, this is often the case for many people. Once parents pass away, people really feel helpless. They feel that if there is anything that can benefit their parents or the deceased, they immediately make a vow to do it. Before the body has even left the house, they perform some good deeds. Everyone comes together to make vows. This is how it is. But I seem to be a bit tougher. I didn't cry when they died. Anyway, I'd already accepted that everything is impermanent, so maybe that helped a bit. Or maybe I just felt that crying wouldn't truly help in any way. This is indeed the fourth important point: experiencing profound grief, feeling deep sorrow. In fact, when our beloved parents pass away, or when anyone dear to us passes away, as stated in the Sutra of Ksitigarbha, the great ghost of impermanence arrives without warning. If one performs good deeds during the 49 days of the intermediate state, originally the deceased might have fallen into a bad realm, but at that time, if the children or some living people, if they perform Buddhist rituals or accumulate good merit for the deceased, there will definitely be a significant change. We've talked about this before. In the future, when our own parents pass away, just crying may not be of much use. Nowadays, some people can't even cry, so they hire others specifically to cry at funerals. I've heard this really does happen. Maybe it's a habit. Some people simply can't cry themselves. In the past, in our Tibetan region, there was a saying, there was a person really couldn't cry, because usually the body is taken out early in the morning. Before dawn, he would go to the deceased's home, but he just couldn't shed any tears. So he would reach into a bucket that had some kind of liquid in it, and then gently dab that liquid just under the delicate area of his eyes. But it turned out that what was in the bucket wasn't anything else. It was blood, the blood of some animal that had died or something like that. By the time dawn broke, he was covered in bloodstains. Then others would say, not only did you shed tears, you even shed tears of blood. Some places have customs like this, and it's the same in Tibetan regions. When someone dies, you must cry very deeply and loudly. If you don't cry loudly, it's considered unfilial. There's that kind of saying too. So sometimes, even here at Larongar, it seems like the men are a bit better at this. When a nun's family member passes away, several people will encourage her, and then she cries loudly. This is also a custom in certain places. Sometimes people are truly grieving. But I think for those who study impermanence, whether it's their parents or anyone else, of course they feel sad, but it's not necessarily the case that they have to cry loudly. Some of our fellow practitioners seem to remain quite calm after their parents pass away. But some people seem to display an overly cheerful attitude, which isn't very good either. If your parents have passed away and you still look especially happy, even joking around with others, that's not particularly appropriate either. And then when it comes to rituals, they should be conducted with solemnity. So when performing rituals at the end, one must be serious and very meticulous during the ceremonies. Because generally in Han regions, the old custom was to observe mourning for 3 years, including some children would follow these old traditions. For the 3 years after their parents passed away, there were many customs to observe. After that, the rituals and offerings would continue every year without interruption. On the anniversary of their passing, these ceremonies would be performed. So these rituals are similar to the nirvana ceremonies we have in Buddhism. For example, Master Tsongkhapa passed away on the 15th, and even now we still hold such nirvana ceremonies for him. And then, for example, the omniscient Mifam Rinpoche is said to have manifested parinirvana on the 29th day of the 4th month in the Tibetan calendar. It's just that the names and the methods are different. But in fact, this is also a kind of ritual, a ceremony. This is also done for great masters, and especially in the future for us, when our own root gurus or Dharma friends who have bestowed the Dharma upon us pass away. It is important and solemn to perform such rituals. For example, during our His Holiness's Parinirvana ceremony, every year, 7 days, everyone devoutly recites the sacred Vajrasattva mantra, practices Guru Yoga, and chants verses in praise of the Guru, things like that. As for parents, you could say this encompasses their whole life as well. How you show filial piety to them while they are alive, how you care for them when they are ill, what you do when they pass away, and how you perform their rituals. All of these have been taught to us. It is said that 5 things must be done. Here it refers to the 5 things to do and 3 prohibitions, all within this section. 5 things must be done and 3 must not. Therefore, the true essence of filial piety here actually includes all of these. Whether you currently have parents or if you have children yourself, you should diligently teach these important principles to your beloved children. If you yourself are not truly filial and respectful to your own parents, then it is absolutely impossible for your children to be genuinely filial to you. Because from a young age, this is a natural law, or you could indeed articulate a form of education that is truly passed down. At this point, you should be able to feel it yourself. The reason I was not filial to my parents before is the same reason my children are not filial to me. If you are filial to your own parents, this example will be directly passed down to your children. In the end, your children will also be very filial to you. So, looking at the bigger picture, society as a whole is a large entity made up of many small units, which are families. For a family like this to live in harmony, one must learn to be filial to their parents. If these 5 crucial conditions are indeed met, and your own beloved parents can truly and genuinely receive your heartfelt filial piety, if some people perhaps have already become monastics themselves, they may wonder how to show filial piety to their parents. There are a few people like this. Of course, among our audience today, there are very few monastics. But as a monastic, the actions of a monastic are actually also a form of filial piety. For example, in China, Master Lianqi wrote a book called Essays from the Bamboo Window. In it, he also talks about 3 types of filial piety. The first type of filial piety is what lay people often do, which is supporting and caring for one's parents. This is the first kind of filial piety. Then the second kind of filial piety, whether for monastics or lay people, is to establish oneself and follow the right path, doing good deeds. Then, when one's character becomes recognized, it can be said to be a contribution to society, and when one does meaningful things for the whole world, others will praise them. This is the second type of filial piety, known as great filial piety. As for the third type of filial piety, he talks about guiding one's parents to recite the Buddha's name and ultimately helping them reborn in the pure land of ultimate bliss. This is the greatest filial piety. So some people feel, am I being unfilial? My parents have been left behind. Actually, whether your parents are still around or not, it's important to help them practice virtuous deeds. Even if you haven't become a monastic, what I said applies. Some people are separated from parents because of work, others because of status. In reality, the time spent away from parents is quite long. If you can, through various means, help your parents recite the Buddha's name and be reborn in the Pure Land, then this, for them, should be the greatest act of filial piety. It's not just filial piety toward your parents, but also a great act of filial piety toward all your relatives and friends. Just as Chan Master Huangbo said in the past, when one child becomes a monastic, 9 generations of ancestors ascend to heaven. If they do not ascend, then all Buddhas would be speaking falsely. I've also talked about this before. After Chan Master Huangbo became a monk, his mother kept waiting for him. She kept crying for such a long time that she eventually went blind. She deeply longed for her son to come back to her. At that time, she stayed at a crossroads, washing the feet of monks passing by. Perhaps Chan Master Huangbo's feet had some distinguishing marks. Finally, one time Chan Master Huangbo came and his mother washed his feet as well. Because his mother couldn't see, while she was carefully washing his feet, she truly did not realize it was actually him. Later, after he had quietly left, the neighbors then said, "The venerable monk whose feet you just washed was, in fact, your very own son." At that precise moment, the poor mother was utterly heartbroken and desperately asked, "Oh, where exactly did he go?" They said he went to the riverbank. So, she kept crying and relentlessly chased after Chan Master Huangbo. However, because she was completely blind, when she eventually reached the riverbank, she tragically ran straight into the flowing river and, sadly, drowned. Afterwards, when he learned of this news, Chan Master Huangbo had already crossed over by boat at that time. After he immediately found out, he returned and recited this sacred verse with great emphasis. And during the cremation, or whatever the ceremony was, his mother truly ascended to heaven. Perhaps she was reborn in a better realm, or maybe she attained liberation. So sometimes on the surface it may seem that worldly people don't really understand how a child is raised like this. And in the end, he became a monk and devoted himself to Buddhism. Of course, this is a Buddhist tradition, whether it's Tibetan Buddhism or Han Buddhism. I've heard that Theravada Buddhism also says the same thing. Actually, Theravada Buddhism is a bit different from Han Buddhism. As long as a child becomes a monk, the parents feel extremely honored. So in the past, most people would undergo a short-term ordination. Some even believe that everyone must become a monk at least once in their lifetime. If you have never been ordained, that is considered unfilial. This is the kind of saying that it's unfilial. But now when we ask some monks from Thailand and Myanmar, it seems that this tradition hasn't always been maintained. Some people do indeed become monks, while others, conversely, never have. There are many cases like this, especially among men. Next, let's talk when serving parents. If in superior position, do not be arrogant. If in a subordinate position, do not be disorderly. In ugly situations, do not argue. The following are 3 things that must not be done, 3 prohibitions. Those who serve their own parents should not be arrogant when in a superior position. That is to say, if one's children hold a certain status, a relatively high position, they must not be unduly proud or excessively arrogant. If they are arrogant, as will be discussed later, there will be no good outcome. So as we children all naturally, you see, in many of the captivating stories we often watch, the emperor frequently goes to his esteemed mother to respectfully pay his heartfelt respects. The emperor rarely, if ever, goes to his national teacher to pay his respects. He goes to his parents, the Empress Dowager, and the Empress Dowager sits there very arrogantly, always in that manner. Then the king comes in, dressed in those robes, swinging his sleeves around, and then he comes over, right? This is him not being arrogant despite his high status. No matter how high his position, he is not arrogant in front of his parents. Nowadays, leaders are arrogant in front of their parents. They are somehow a little bit... I'm worried that some of the Dharma teachers here, if they make a bit of progress, they stop caring about their parents. But from what I've seen, some of the parents I know are quite formidable. They definitely keep their children's authority in their own hands until the day they die. In their eyes, their child is always someone immature. They feel like their child doesn't understand anything. It's just like that. No matter what, if you're in a high position, don't be arrogant. That's the first point. And then if you're in a lower position, don't cause trouble. So if the child doesn't hold a very high status, like a minister or someone lower, not someone especially high up, not like the emperor, then for people like this, at the very least, they should not stir up trouble or do bad things. They shouldn't do anything illegal or against the rules. This is what people of average status should not do. Here, when we talk about being below, it actually refers to people of average status not doing anything illegal or against the rules. That's the second type. Then for those in the lowest position, they don't compete. Lowest here means being of the lowest status, the most humble, the very bottom. If their children are of the lowest status, then they don't fight for things, because generally speaking, if someone in a high position is arrogant, that's their biggest trouble. Actually, I think people in ancient times were very wise. Their descriptions of human nature are especially detailed, even by today's standards. People of average status often engage in destructive behavior. They frequently steal and do all sorts of things that break the rules. Then, for those at the very bottom, the lowest of the low, they often fight and quarrel, even with people of their own kind. Especially as people sink further down the social ladder, they constantly argue over trivial matters, going back and forth endlessly. Generally, people of higher status won't argue endlessly over trivial matters. They won't get into constant disputes over such things. So these three types of behavior are things one should avoid. Why is that? The reason is explained below. If those in high positions become arrogant, they perish. If those at the bottom create chaos, they are punished. If the lowest fight among themselves, there will be war. If you are someone in a high position with status and identity, and you become arrogant, then sooner or later you will inevitably fall. You will definitely indeed end up failing. That's the real reason behind it. If you engage in illegal or disorderly acts, then you will most certainly be punished. Sometimes when we visit various prisons, we observe that most of the inmates are ordinary people because they have committed theft, rape, or murder. As for those with particularly high status, perhaps the prisons I personally visit aren't the especially unique ones, but in any case, it is certainly true that ordinary people often receive various kinds of punishments. Those of lower status tend to get into fights, and for this reason, they are punished with weapons or even killed, subjected to violence and death. Because people at the lower levels, whether it's over disputes about pastures or other things, in our Tibetan region there are often disputes over grazing land, and because of that there are frequent conflicts between people. This may also be because my level is not enough. Then they will inevitably fight each other, and they may very well end up killing one another. There is such a situation. As long as the three are not eliminated, although we consume 3 kinds of animals every single day, it is still considered unfilial. Although children use the 3 sacrifices every day to show their respect to their parents, the 3 kinds of livestock are pigs, sheep, and cattle. In ancient times, people really attached very great importance to these meats. If someone's parents have meat to eat, it truly means he is the most filial. If the superior individual is an arrogant man, the middle one often engages in illegal activities. The inferior one often fights with others. If you are such a person, even if using the money earned through truly unclean means, to provide your parents with the best meat from the 3 kinds of animals every day. Delicious beef for breakfast, hearty pork for lunch, a delightful lamb for dinner, like that. Just kidding, it's not divided up like that. As parents, if their children are truly obedient, then indeed in this world
even if they don't make truly great contributions, as long as they absolutely don't do bad things.
Some parents I know, I'm not particularly familiar with Han people, because in daily life I don't know them very well. But when I look at my hometown and my relatives, some children are especially obedient. I don't know why. It seems like some of it is directly related to their family or their specific clan. But some children, none of them listen at all. The money that those parents have carefully saved up over their entire lifetime, then one of them inevitably gets sentenced, then there's fighting again, and then all sorts of other unfortunate things happen. The parents consistently keep having to pay for them, keep having to help them out, but it just never ends. So some parents unfortunately shed tears every single day because of these challenging children. If all those tears were gathered together, perhaps not an entire ocean, but at the very least several large buckets of water for sure. But for some other parents, it seems like their children are all very good and well behaved. They always treat their parents well, even if they're not very wealthy. But their own lives are very especially peaceful and quite quiet indeed. Some families are like that. Even though the parents have enough to eat and wear, they're still worried about them all the time. He's locked up in prison, he's committed corruption, or he gets into fights every day, things like that. There are some families I know of where one person has already been in prison 4 times, but at the same time he hasn't committed any major crimes. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't be able to get out for life. But he's also rather timid, so he often does small bad things. And then he gets sentenced again, 1 or 2 years at a time. Because what he does isn't a major crime, he gets out again. Once he's out, he starts doing bad things again, just like that. So his parents worry every day and often say, I'm not going to care anymore. My child is just too terrible, I'm not going to care anymore. But when something really happens, it seems like the parents' hearts always soften. So as children toward our parents, it's not really necessary to live in a very particularly spacious house, driving luxury cars, dressing well, eating well. That's not what it's about. The most important thing is to give your parents peace of mind, not to make them worry every day. Some people are very reassuring, no matter if they're in the country or abroad. My child is a good person, he wouldn't do anything bad. If it's like this, maybe that's the greatest form of filial piety for parents. This is explained very clearly here as well. So, fellow practitioners, when you're being filial to your parents, even if sometimes you can't always provide them with good food or clothes, it's still very good to do what you truly can, according to your own personal circumstances, even if it's just a little bit, as long as it genuinely brings them joy, especially while they are still alive, if you can make them truly happy. This is something that both monastics and lay people should do. In our Tibetan region, there are also many folk songs about this. But here, I won't use a folk song. Instead, I'll use a teaching from the Contemplation on the Mind Ground Sutra. If the compassionate mother is present in the home, this is called wealth. If a compassionate mother is at home, that is what it means to be truly wealthy. If the compassionate mother is not present, this is called poverty. If the compassionate mother is no longer in this world, no matter how much otherworldly wealth you have, you are still very poor. We often say that if your parents are gone, you are just an orphan. No matter what, the heart of an orphan is always cold. That's how people often describe it, right? So for those of us who are truly fortunate enough to still have our beloved parents, this should undeniably be the most cherished and happiest time of our precious lives. Of course, everyone's unique and personal fate is different. Maybe your parents are far away from you, but nowadays it doesn't seem so distant, if you truly really care about your dear parents. You should call them often or video chat with them, but many children don't want to see their parents because they think their parents are unpleasant to look at. There are very few videos of their parents on their phones or in their videos. Most of the videos are of other people, which also shows that they are not very respectful or filial toward their parents. If you are truly filial to your parents, as a Buddhist, I've seen in the Contemplation on the Mind Ground Sutra, making offerings to the Buddha, making offerings to one's parents are the same. If one is filial and another makes offerings to the Buddha, the merit is exactly the same. If you are filial to your parents and someone else makes offerings to the Buddha, then the merit from both is completely equal. This is also indeed stated in the Abhidharma Kosha. For parents, the sick, arhats and acharyas, even if they are not sages, making offerings to them also brings boundless and immeasurable merit. This has always been said. Therefore, the most important aspect of filial piety towards parents is to give them peace of mind. And whenever we have time, we should often, if your parents are still alive now, I hope at the very least you can contact them perhaps once a week or even once a month. Some devoted parents even buy brand new mobile phones just to see their beloved children, and then they frequently call them. My own dear mother used to do this very same thing too. Back when we were at Lerung, sometimes when the landline didn't work, she insisted on having a mobile phone. I still have her number saved in my phone now. It's labeled as Mother. I still haven't deleted it. Sometimes when I'm scrolling through my contacts and see Mother, I press it, and then I feel a different kind of emotion in my heart. Oh, she's no longer in this world, so of course the call won't go through. So sometimes when someone leaves this world, you can't reach them by phone anymore. This is something everyone should realize. Most of us here were born from the womb, not miraculously born. If you were miraculously born, then maybe you would feel an attachment to lotuses or to something else. But after all, we are born from the womb. Yesterday I listened to many fellow practitioners here sharing during the exam. They spoke very well, and I could see they were speaking with real feeling. This is also very good. During the process of sharing, next, let's talk about Chapter 11, the 5 punishments. Confucius said, among the 3,000 categories of the 5 punishments, none is greater than the crime of being unfilial. We have many various criminal laws and additional constitutions, right? There were also many criminal laws in ancient times. The main ones were tattooing, cutting off the nose, cutting off the feet, castration, and the death penalty. There were 5 types of punishments. Tattooing meant after someone broke the law, characters carved onto their body. And before those marks had healed, they would be stained with ink. So whenever anyone saw them, they'd immediately know, this person has already... Actually, nowadays, when we release frogs during animal liberation ceremonies, carving onto bodies is a form of tattooing punishment. But for turtles, it probably doesn't hurt, right? That's a kind of tattooing punishment. As for cutting off the nose, that's called cherishing, cutting off the nose. Even now, in some underdeveloped areas of Tibet, this still exists. For example, if someone doesn't like another person, they just abandon them. If she goes with someone else, especially if it's a woman, they have to give her a quite rather disfiguring punishment indeed, which means disfiguring her face, that is, cutting off her nose. I've seen before that some elderly people don't have noses at all. When they speak, it's like that. They say that when they were young, because of their own actions, they got into trouble and suffered this kind of punishment. It seems that some countries still have this nowadays. But in most places in Tibet now, people are generally opposed to this. However, in a very few places it still exists. For example, between 2 families. If there are issues in a marriage, they might use this method as a threat. Even in the biography of Sarah Khandro, it's mentioned. At that time she was with someone named Jia Zhu, and she had 2 children. Later she left him and went with someone else. At that time the other side said, we must cut off her nose. At that moment Sarah Khandro felt great aversion and was ready to leave this world. There's a particular part like this in the story, but later on it seems that she fully recovered from it, thankfully. And then there was also the punishment of cutting off feet and such. There was also a punishment called castration, which destroys the reproductive organs. And then dapishing, which is execution by beheading. Altogether, there were 3,000 of these. The earlier punishments of tattooing and cutting off the nose each had 1,000 cases. Then there were 500 cases of foot amputation and 300 of castration. Finally, there were 200 executions by beheading, making a total of 3,000. Ancient criminal laws were really numerous, and some countries were quite cruel. Actually, it wasn't until later that these basically disappeared. So now it seems that in the United States criminal law, the federal government and the 50 states each have different criminal laws. Some things are considered crimes in one place, but not necessarily in another state. In China, there are currently approximately 452 articles in the Chinese criminal law. The Constitution has 143 articles amended 4 or 5 times. Including this latest amendment, there have been many changes. Constitutions and criminal laws have always differed by country since ancient times. Back then they were part of the 3,000 articles under the 5 punishments. Among all these criminal laws, being unfilial was considered the gravest offense. Perhaps those who were unfilial, were they subject to the harshest punishments among the 5 types of criminal law? If nowadays all unfilial people were to be punished, many people would find it hard to escape punishment. So next, let's talk about what counts as the most unfilial behavior. Here 3 types are mentioned, that is to say, those who coerce their ruler have no respect for authority. Those who are not sages have no law. Those who are not filial have no kinship. This is the path to great chaos. In other words, those who threaten or coerce their ruler Whether it's their sovereign or their chosen leader, such individuals are arrogant and often disregard others. A ruler must be respected, treated as one would treat a father. So if someone is disrespectful to their leader or threatens their leader, if you don't obey me, I'll do this or that to you. This is a sign of being unfilial, and ultimately it puts yourself in great danger. I've also mentioned this to everyone before. No matter where you are, even if you look down on someone or have your own opinions, you still need to comply with your leader. This is truly very important. Otherwise, you won't be able to survive in that environment yourself. If you go against this, unless you have some special purpose, generally speaking, this is not the behavior of a wise person. If you really want to stay here for the long term, your attitude toward your leader should not be one of constant indifference. If something comes up, you should communicate it. It shouldn't be like that, regardless of whether they are fully qualified or not. And I've noticed that recently here as well. We've invited some very professional teachers to give us lectures. Some of our Khenpos and Khenmos involved in Dharma propagation, academic affairs, and teaching have also spent a few days studying management. Some leaders have a strong influence, and being an outstanding leader, this really is very important. Some of us monastics tend to disregard others as if we think we're above everyone else. There was a teacher we once had who said, "Our proverb teacher, one time I was sitting with a classmate below the podium and he seemed to have received some kind of letter, so I snatched it from him. The teacher lectured on the treasury of good sayings up front. We talked below and he fixed his gaze on me. My Tibetan grades were better than others, so I thought, understanding the proverbs, I'd know the answers. So maybe I was a bit arrogant. Don't think you're number one. There's always a second and a third in the world." So some of us shouldn't think we're the best in the world. Otherwise, there's a second and a third. But we didn't dare say it to his face. We whispered that. No matter what, the second and third are still not as good as the first. So I see that some of us here are still learning very well. The teachers have also heard that the teaching here is very good, and our monks here as well. The monks might need to look at the world a bit more. Doing so won't have negative impact on your practice. Some people think that learning, having discriminating thoughts will affect, but no matter what, we're not practicing exceptionally well anyway. Even if you don't study, you won't achieve realization in days. In front of leaders, arrogance and disrespect are not good. Then the second point, those who are not sages have no rules. Here, non should be a verb, meaning to slander or defame. So if someone slanders a sage, such a person, they have no principles, they are lawless, right? In other words, if someone slanders a sage, just like what was said earlier about the Duke of Zhou or the teachings of Confucius, such a person has no sense of rules or principles in their eyes. As stated in the Treatise on the Modes of a Ruler, one must not go against their leaders. Otherwise, you really won't be able to survive in this harsh modern world. If you have faith, you must not slander the teachings of the sages. If you do slander them, sages are those who understand many truths that transcend the mundane world. Such a person will also certainly not have a very good future ahead of them. So do not slander the sages. If you slander the sages, you have no sense of rules or human decency. This is a bad behavior. Those who are not filial have no kinship, and they do not praise or slander others. What do they slander? They slander those who are filial, those who do not praise filial piety, those who are unfilial. Such people have no real kinship. In their eyes, they have no parents at all. This is also a truly detestable thing. So if someone is not respectful to their leaders, nor to sages, and is also not respectful to their own parents, then what kind of person is this? This is the path to great chaos. This is the very root of all great disorder. If we look at it from the perspective of our world, to put it another way, we should show respect to our leaders and to our parents. We should also respect the culture and teachings of the sages who have transcended the world. This is the foundation of all peace and stability. Therefore, it is best for us not to do things that bring chaos to the world. We must always have a sense of gratitude, whether towards leaders or others. A Buddhist scripture called the Sutra of the True Dharma of the Mahayana Bodhisattva Canon also says that serving one's parents comes first. Serving one's parents is very important. Secondly, it says honoring and following teacher are equally important. Respecting and honoring one's teacher is just as important. We should carefully contemplate the teachings of the three jewels. We should reflect on the Dharma doors and merits of the three jewels. This is what is called meaningful and beneficial. These are truly the most valuable and meaningful things in our lives. In other words, one is being filial to one's parents. Another is showing special respect to one's teachers and leaders. If a person has a sense of reverence, it is actually a very good thing. But if one is extremely arrogant, the other day, when some teachers from our foundation went to visit families, one of my former teachers, well, you could certainly call him a teacher, he taught me 2 or 3 classes before, that day he sent me a message saying that his family was also having some difficulties. Later, our teachers went to visit their home. During the home visit, the first thing they noticed was that his daughter was very poorly behaved, extremely arrogant, and had dyed her hair. When she saw our staff, first of all, after scheduling appointments, she acted very arrogantly, saying, "I'm not available today, not available tomorrow." Even though she was the one in need of assistance, she still said that she was not free. In fact, a person's attitude, an arrogant mindset, no matter if you're a student, a teacher, or anyone else, everyone should still be humble. We see that some truly remarkable people indeed in the world today are very modest and have no arrogance at all. They don't put on airs or act superior in any way. If hearts are truly empty, but on the outside this hollow shell puts on a very arrogant appearance that really isn't good. If our hearts are truly filled with deep wisdom and genuine compassion, then indeed we can virtually get along with anyone without exception. Some people, when it's someone they like, they'll say, "Oh, you're here," and just keep hugging them. But when it's someone they don't get along with, their attitude changes immediately. Actually, no matter what, everyone is still a sentient human being, whether it's someone you have a good relationship with or not. It might be a bit difficult to fully blend in with them. But at the very least, please don't make it quite so obvious. Some people among us right now are really extremely sensitive individuals, and they tend to draw very clear and distinct lines in everything they encounter. When they see someone who treats them well, their relationship is incredibly close. But after a while, the relationship slowly starts to deteriorate. There are many stories like this, but I won't tell them now. There's no more time for storytelling today. If you want me to tell more captivating stories next time, I'm just sharing these actual real-life stories, then you might have a much better understanding of these important things. That's all for today's engaging class.
Bandara